Okay, for today's video, we are going to make a honey mead. For those of you who don't know what honey mead is, it is a wine that's made from water, yeast, and honey. From what we know, it's actually the oldest known alcoholic beverage. Archaeologists have found pottery, tools, artifacts that show traces of honey mead in them, and these traces predate written history. So alcohol itself, honey mead, were all probably discovered on accident. In other words, there was probably a bad rainstorm or something that hit a bee's nest. Some honey got down, mixed with some water and some wild yeast, and formed a pool. And then there you go. You've got spontaneously fermented honey mead. Obviously, we have a lot more, much more sophisticated way of producing this beverage these days, and it's kind of a part of antiquity, really. Like you just don't see a lot of mead halls anymore. The story of Beowulf, if you ever read that poem, describes the warriors all meeting at the mead hall after their conquests and whatnot. Anyway. So we're gonna make our own honey mead here, and you can make it kind of however you want. You can make it super sweet, super dry, anything in between. You can even you can make it carbonated, not still. You can keg it, you can bottle it. Some mead makers make a mead and put it out in 2 to 3 months. Others will let it sit in fermentation for 5, 10, 20 years. Any length of time. The longer it sits, the more it's going to mellow out. The less it's going to taste like gasoline and sugar. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on our mead today. It's going to be kind of a basic mead. We're going for, in this case, we're going to go for a semi-sweet mead that I'm going to flavor with a little vanilla bean. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get the process started. All right, so here are the ingredients that we have to get our mead started. We have our pot here. There's a big kettle. I've measured out 2 gallons of water. And what we have here is about 15 pounds of honey. We're gonna end up with 5 gallons altogether. And then of course right here, we see the vanilla bean. Of course, attached to my pot here is a thermometer. That's how we're going to monitor the temperature as we make this mead. So we're gonna get started just by adding our honey in. And just like if you've seen any of my videos making syrups, you always add the sugar in after you add the water in, or it seizes up. This is honey and it can be a little stubborn, so it'll probably do some of its own seizing up, but we'll just use a wire whisk to turn the honey and water into a solution. And we're just going to empty these jugs of honey into here. And of course, it's a little sticky, and you'll have some residual honey kind of left behind. So what I'll always do, instead of sitting there fighting it, we'll recap it and turn it upside down on the countertop just to let the honey run down so we don't waste anything. So this honey here is a local honey that is produced just a little north of this city. It's a raw, unfiltered honey made by some happy bees, I'm sure. Anyway, I like to use this local product. I like to make it, 100% local mead, from bee to bottle. Not much more than 20 to 30 mile drive. Some people who are mead makers do not do this step where they're going to heat the honey. The reason is they don't want to damage the botanicals that are naturally occurring in the honey. I tend to favor the idea of heating, especially if you're using a raw honey, simply because honey does not go bad. It never expires. It never goes sour because of the viscosity of the liquid. In fact, the only reason that you can get a fermentation to happen out of honey is because we're adding water to it here and lowering the viscosity and then introducing yeast, which is going to consume the sugar from the honey and then, of course, create alcohol. Anyway, what does happen sometimes in raw honey is there can be a botulism bacteria that occurs on the surface. Now, this botulism bacteria is harmless to adults to consume. If you put it on your toast or whatever, you're going to be fine. It's not going to make you sick. However, I try to keep as few microorganisms as possible alive as we make this mead. The reason being, the only thing you want eating your sugar in here is the yeast that we're going to pitch. Any other microorganism can take over, and it's not going to make you sick, but you're going to end up with some off flavors, or just something that you don't really want to drink, something that's a little overly carbonated, just kind of gross. So what we're going to do, we're not going to go to a full boil. A full boil would just kind of decimate the honey, take the character away. But what we're going to do is bring this up to about 140 degrees, hold it there for 20 minutes, and that should be enough to not only save most of those nuances of the honey, but also kill any little bacteria, wild yeast, or whatever that might be existing in the honey, and keeping it from taking over during the fermentation process. All right, so we'll take a little pause here, and we'll come back. I'll show you what it looks like when it's hitting that heat peak.